Hey, Dave, I think we're ready to go if you want to get started on initial announcements.
Hey, good afternoon and welcome to the State Water Resources Control Board's Winery Journal Order Fee Stakeholder Meeting. My name is David Ceccarelli and I am the Chief of the Fee and Revenue Branch. I will be facilitating this meeting alongside help with my lead manager in the Fee and Revenue Branch, Glen Osterhage. Complying with COVID-19 emergency safety guidelines, today's meeting is being held remotely via webcast and Zoom. The meeting handout was sent on March 8th. This handout was sent out through the Water Board's Fees Regulations LIRIS list, along with instructions on how to participate through the Zoom platform. The handout is also posted on our Water Board's fee webpage, which is at www.waterboards.ca.gov/resources/fees/stakeholder. Individuals attending via Zoom will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments during the open discussion part of our meeting. Please use the raise the hand feature on Zoom. If you are joining through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen, which is feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. Today we'll have several fee and revenue branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that your experience as few participation bumps as possible. If any time throughout this event you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. I'd like to also acknowledge some of the staff that's working behind the scenes, which is Sarah Fong and Itzi Abeda. I also want to introduce a couple of program staff who are here to help provide support. There are Laura Wartrip from the Division of Water Quality and also Melissa Gunter from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. Again, we thank you for joining us today virtually. We thank you for your patience as we move to 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective way. So let's go over just a few meeting guidelines. Remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you don't have them, don't worry. We will be sharing the documents on the screen and you can request a copy of the documents after the meeting. Remember, at any time, if any technical issues come up, please feel free to email us. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And again, remember, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event by sending them to feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. So let's take a moment here to review today's agenda. So we'll start with a fee development timeline. We'll talk about the guiding principles for the Waste Discharge Permit Fund program fees, our projected program expenditures. We'll go through some fee alternatives. We'll talk about some potential fee reductions, and then we'll have an open discussion, and then we'll follow this with next steps. With that said, I'm going to move the next part of the presentation over to Glen Osterhage.
Thank you, David. As David indicated, I'm Glen Osterhage, the branch manager for Division of Administrative Services in our fee branch. A number of the slides that were sent out on the handout are very similar to what we presented last August. Obviously, a lot has changed, or a number of things have changed with the Winery Journal Order. So we wanted to have all that kind of settle down before we reconvene to talk about the associated fees for this permit. So on the screen is the timeline. We've adapted this to start with the adoption of the order back in January. Obviously, today is the first fee stakeholder meeting since the adoption. If we need to have a second meeting, depending on how the conversation goes today, we can look to schedule one next month to continue the conversation. At some point, we will look to go to our board for the adoption. So we have a range here, May to June. We don't have any set date in mind. We want to make sure that we get a good conversation going for the information. We go to the board. After we do go to the board, and assuming our board does adopt some type of fee structure, we go through the Office of Administrative Law. It's the acronym OAL for the approval process. We do use emergency regulations, but there is a step we have to go through the OAL just to make sure we dot all the I's, cross all the T's. And so sometime June, July, maybe August, the fees will come effective related to the general order. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that we presented last August, kind of our general guiding principles. This is a very high level. It's not meant to go down to the nitty gritty on setting our fees, but we always discuss that we have a target revenue, and we'll go on to that in the next slide. So whatever we do to propose a fee structure or make modifications, we still have to generate the same amount of revenue. So if we have a baseline and we say, you know what, this one group, call it group A, should pay less, that means everyone else in that pool needs to pay a little more. So it is offsetting. So we call it revenue neutral, zero balance due, zero balance gain, that type of a structure. Number two, this is not a model for a service. So we do not track time by staff specific to any site. It's a program. Actually, it's a fund level commitment. So we do say that the winery general order falls under what we call our WDR waste discharge requirement program. So it's a statewide program in which all costs across the state are pooled together. All fee payers within that program pays for the statewide program. So we do not track time. Say an engineer or a geologist or a scientist is not tracking time specific to any site for that. The third one, I kind of just mentioned this one, but the fees must be implemented statewide. So if you're living in the Central Coast, living in the Valley, living in the North Coast, the fee structure is going to be the same across the state. For the Waste Discharge Permit Fund, we call it the WDPF. We do have what we call foundational program costs. The primary programs are based in planning, TMDL, there's some enforcement, the monitoring programs, the SWAMP and GAMMA, those are all considered foundational or redirected costs that all fee payers within a WDPF pay a portion towards. And most people understand, there are indirect overhead type costs into the program. So you're paying for the direct staff within the WDR program. In this case, we're trying to target how much staff is going to be towards their winery. There is the overhead and indirect, and then there is a third component called foundational. Now the numbers don't come out to 30, 30, 30, one third, one third, one third, but it's pretty close for every dollar. About one third, so that can be 25 to 35%, will go to program. About one third will go to foundational costs, and about one third is your standard indirect and overhead. And then finally, we do try to set our fees so there are to minimize yearly swings. We've got a number of comments from different fee payers over the years. They don't want to pay $1,000 one year, $10,000 the second year, $3,000 the third year, $500 the fourth year. We want consistent fees year over year. And that is why we go to our board each year to implement any changes to our fee structure to try to keep us within balance. So again, this is the exact same chart we did last August. I'm gonna see if we right now quickly to make sure I've got my audio on with my support staff. Do we have any email questions? I just want to make sure I have my connection through to my staff right now.
There are no questions right now.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I just want to make sure we had the connection in there. Next slide, please. So this chart, again, we provided last August. We did modify, and I'll explain that here in a moment, but these are specific to the winery general order costs, actually the winery program. So the left-hand column is the specific staff workload that's being targeted. Again, there's other costs within the program, the foundational costs and some other ones, but staff working specifically on the winery workload. We have 6 bullet points of different types of activities. If there's any questions that come up on this, I will defer this over to program staff, but this is the exact same information we previously provided. The second column is the one where we made a slight adjustment. This is the existing statewide PYs. PY is the acronym for personnel years. You can kind of think of that as a individual or how many staff. We had originally targeted 17 program, did a few tweaks since last August, and have dropped it down to 16, so we reduced it by 1. The estimation is 2 staff will be at the state board and 14 staff will be spread out across the different regional boards. We're currently using an average cost of $200,000. This is actually a little bit low for our WDPF program, but again, we're trying to make sure that we target a lower number initially to begin with. So those are the math majors out there, 16 staff at $200,000. I'm moving to the right-hand column is $3.2 million is the estimated annual costs for this program. We added in the second point under the staff costs, estimated individual order revenue, $700,000. So those are existing permitted facilities that we're estimating will stay under individual enrollment. They will not convert over to the general order. And we're estimating from what we think those facilities are going to stay, it's roughly about $700,000 of revenue will come in through those facilities. So those coming in under the winery general order, the very third line there, it's about $2.5 million is what we're targeting to collect from new enrollees or those that will convert over from individual to general order enrollment. So that 2.5 is our target. Next slide, please. So because the handout we sent out has this on one page, but for presentation purposes, we had to spread it over 2. So what we're calling option A is a fee by volume, and there's 2 different versions of this. This particular slide, if you look at the middle column under the enrollment tier, there's 1 value for tier 1, 1 value for tier 2, 1 value for tier 3. And then we broke down tier 4 just because of the volumes get so large. Anybody's from 1 million to 15 million is considered tier 4 enrollment. We broke down into 3 different groups. So this is one option we came to. So the lowest fee payers is $700 a year. Excuse me, got a little caught my throat. And then the high end is about 18,000. And actually, when we have a modification to this, and so Sarah, I don't know if you have the one where the actual minimum is 750 now, and the maximum is 19,000. So we made a slight change from this table. So what was physically sent out through the libraries list actually has the proper values. So I don't know, Sarah, if you have handy the copy of the agenda and the handouts that were sent out, I think we'd rather use that table first. So give us a moment as we try to pull up the proper slide here. Okay, so this is what was actually sent out on the libraries list. So option A, again, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 all have just 1 value for that enrollment. Tier 4 has 3 different enrollments. So the minimum is $750, and the this proposal, the maximum is $19,000. That $19,000 is right in the middle of our, if those are familiar with the WDR fee structure, we have a threat and complexity structure. So that's kind of right in the middle of that structure. The lowest fee for WDR is just over $2,000. So for the most part, anyone that's in tier 1 and tier 2 are going to spend significantly less than they would under the existing WDR fee schedule. The tier 3 is right at the minimum value for the other WDR fee payers. And then if you're in tier 4, that's where the fee goes up, kind of consistent with what we use on the threat and complexity model. Option B on this slide, we take tier 2 and tier 3 and we break them into 2 different fee values. So tier 1 is still $750 because it's just 1 value. Tier 2 has a breakdown of $1,000 or $1,200, depending on your volume, where option A was just $1,100 So it's kind of the average of those two. Same thing for tier 3. The lower end is 2,000, upper end is 3,000. So like option A that we just looked at, it was $2,500 as the middle ground, and then tier 4 stays the same. So we just threw a couple of different options out there. If the community feels that, you know what, we need to have a differentiation within tier 2 and tier 3, just because the volumes start to get larger, but tier 4 will remain the same. So that's one option we came up to. It roughly generates the $2.5 million that we're estimating that we need to get out of these types of enrollments. So with that, we're going to go to option, the next slide or the next page on here. And this is what we're considering an option for a threat complexity type structure. If there are questions that do come up as to when we start getting to the language down below on here, again, I'll toss it to the program staff that have the technical background to explain some of the differences between the categories and the threat. But the fees are very consistent. It's just a different way of gathering the enrollment numbers. So the tier 4, which is the largest enrollments, instead of basing it off of volume, we're going to go off of a threat, which is a 1, and then a complexity rating of A, B, or C to get your 3 different ranges. Same thing with tier 3 and tier 2, and then tier 1. And we'll go through this description here in a moment. That the values go down, obviously, as the tier enrollment and the threat and complexity go down as well. So, Sarah, if you want to go back to the presentation, I think we can go to the language that's on the threat and complexity, unless you just want to stay on this slide.
Just stay on this for a minute. I'm trying to fix it so we can have everything in one.
Okay, and then as we make the change, Sarah will post the presentation to our website. So once we have it corrected to the actual fees that we're looking at, we'll make sure that the corrected version gets posted. So again, what was sent out on LIRIS list, those values are the proper ones. So here, and again, if we start taking questions here in a moment, I can pass it off to Laurel, someone else from the program staff. But the threat to water quality, we abbreviate that TTWQ. Category 1, I'm going to read this verbatim. Those discharges of waste that could cause the long-term loss of a designated beneficial use of the receiving water. Examples of long-term loss of a beneficial use include the loss of agricultural supply, industrial process supply, industrial service supply, municipal and domestic supply. Let's see, I'm kind of drinking water supply. There's a lot of parentheses and parens in here. I'm kind of going to go into the parentheses at the end. So a tier 4, generally it's going to consist of, sorry, a little scrolling while I'm trying to read there. The highest volume discharges to land over time, and discharges are not seasonal. So tier 4 is going to fall into the category 1 structure. Category 2, again, just kind of reading this verbatim, those discharges of waste that could impair the designated beneficial use of receiving water, cause short-term violations of water quality objectives, cause secondary drinking water standards to be violated, or cause a nuisance. So generally, this is tier 3. The higher volume discharges to land than tier 1 and 2, and discharges may be seasonal. And then finally, category 3, this is where the tier 1 and tier 2 generally will fall into. Those discharges of waste that could degrade water quality without violating water quality objectives, or could cause a minor impairment of designated beneficial uses as compared to threat 1 and 2. So all of you technical people that are out there probably understand this language a lot better than I do. I'm going to ask Laurel, since you're on the technical side, if there's anything specific on these categories that needs to be discussed before we kind of move on.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. So on the complexity, as Glenn broke down, there's a threat and a complexity rating for this option. And there is when it comes to complexity, although the tier 4 wineries are potentially the most sophisticated, they can take more staff time and more review because they are more complex. So you see kind of the reverse relationship on that. And so I just wanted to note that about the complexity versus threat.
Okay, so if we scroll down, Sarah, to the complexity portion of the threat and complexity model. So the complexity, and I'm not going to read all this, but you can kind of see category A. If you're tier 4, it's on-site. I'm assuming GWM is groundwater monitoring. I'm learning all my acronyms for this program. Tier 3, if you have the approved GWM/GW limits instead of effluent limits of SDS. So again, we kind of break down different levels of complexity to the different tiers. So if you're considered category A, you take that with your threat to water quality, you'll get a 1A, 1B, or 1C, 2A, 2B, or 2C. So depending on your matrix that you have of your threat to water and your complexity will allow you to go to the fee structure. So obviously this is a little more complicated fee structure than volume, but some people feel it's better represents perceived workload. Just because you discharge a lot of wastewater doesn't mean you have a lot of staff time associated with you. You could be small, have a lot of staff time. You could be big, very minimal staff time. So the thought process here was try to incorporate some of the complexities that might exist on site. Obviously, the more complexity, the more threat you have, the higher the fee is going to be because there's more staff time. So it tries to balance out site-specific characteristics versus using a simplified or simpler version of just volume determines what your cost is going to be. So again, I'm going to pass this off to Laurel if there's anything on the technical side to explain the differences between category A, B, or C.
No, I think that you covered it pretty good, Glenn, and you're correct. Groundwater monitoring is GWN and SDS is subsurface disposal system. And as you note here, when it comes to the threat, it is more tiered where certain tiers fall into certain threat categories. But as you see here, that tier 4 can go all the way down to category C, acknowledging those pond and land application areas are different than the subsurface disposal complexity. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Laurel. And I think if, Sarah, if you're ready to go back to the presentation, we can go to agenda item 6, which is potential fee reductions. And then we'll be able to open up the table or open up discussion for anything that we need to talk about. So the other thing that was discussed was potential fee reductions. There's 2 different ones that we're throwing out there. One is local agency oversight. So this is if again, local agency is doing work on behalf of the water boards, it's going to take less staff time, water board staff time. You'll still probably be paying the local agency, but the water board staff time will be reduced. So we're starting with a fee reduction of 35% for those that are considered under the local agency oversight. And the second one is if there is an improved sustainability program. I do not believe there's any currently, but if the regional board or the state board approves any of those types of programs, we're saying there may be a correlation to do a 10% fee reduction for that one as well. So these are 2 different ways of reducing the annual fee depending on your local setup. Some regions will have the local agencies, some regions may not. Some facilities may be able to get into a sustainability program, either one of those or both. They could be additive to reduce the fees. So that covers what we were presenting today, starting off with 2 different types of fees, one based off of volume, one based off of threat and complexity. And then regardless of the fee structure, we are looking to offer a couple of different ways of reducing fees for the 2 that are on the screen right now. So I see one hand up quickly, Mr. Danny Merkley. It's only been about 2 weeks since we heard from you, so it's good to see you in such a short time again. So we'll open up the floor. We'll start with Danny.
Simple question. Since you're looking at a time frame of adoption in May or June, what do we do when the normal time period, the second meeting in September comes along? Are you going to relook at this, or will this carry us through until September 2022?
Very good question, Danny. You kind of took my thunder for later on. So I will propose that whatever time frame that we take this to the board, May, June, July, that when we get to our normal board adoption in September, that winery, whatever we adopt for the winery stays in place through the September board meeting. So this fee will go through the entire fiscal year, 21-22. The other thing we haven't gotten into yet is we're anticipating it's going to take 3, 4, maybe 5 years for the enrollments for this program to kind of sustain or flatten out a little bit. So we anticipate we're going to be looking at this. Well, we'll do it yearly, but really in about 3 or 4 years, we're going to take a nice heavy dive because we're not sure exactly who's going to enroll under which tiers. It makes a difference on collecting fees. If we have more of the larger enrollments, that's more of a fee. If there's more on the smaller side, that's less of a fee. We also don't know exactly how many existing facilities under individual orders are going to enroll into the general order. So there is some flux there. And it takes a number of years. I believe there's up to 3 years for facilities to become enrolled into this program. So to Danny's first question is, whatever we take to the board here in the short term, we will not look, or at least I will recommend, not changing it in September, letting it ride for at least one full fiscal year cycle. And then after that, we'll keep monitoring it. And when we feel this program matures enough or becomes stable enough where we don't expect a lot of enrollment changes, we can reassess. If we're generating extra revenue, then obviously we're going to look to lower it. If the enrollments are lower than we used for our estimates, then we can request increases. So we'll consider that. Danny, anything else? Nope. Okay. I'm waiting to see if any other hands go. We got another hand.
There's an email question.
Okay, let me get Suzanne first, and then we'll get the email question. Go ahead, Suzanne. I'm going to try your last name, Suzanne. Is it Ezekiel?
It is Ezekiel. Very
Hey,
good.
I got one.
Well done. Yeah, I think the email question's also mine. So I'll start with, you were saying that the local oversight program could result in a 35% reduction in fees, and the sustainability program in a 10% reduction in fees. Can you explain how you came up with those percentages?
So Laurel jumped on real quick here. So I'm going to quickly pass this off to Laurel and take it out of my viewpoint. Go ahead,
And
Laurel.
Glenn, if you want to kick it off, feel free.
No, it's all yours.
Yeah, and the reason I was quick on this, I almost jumped in when Danny Merkley was commenting. So these are proposed. I want to start with the approved sustainability program. Currently, there are no approved sustainability programs from the state water board or regional board for this order. And so for this first year, and these are all based on staff costs, approving the sustainability programs will actually be an increase on the state board and regional board workload. So we don't anticipate saving a lot of money on these programs right now. However, as they mature, we think there's a potential that they would save staff time because there's some local oversight from those sustainability programs and so forth. So think of this as a moving target, and this is where we're starting. With the local agency oversight programs, as Glenn mentioned, it's a net, basically the higher this reduction goes, the more other fees may change. And so we're starting it at 35% to get comments on. If you go too high, then you have to look at where the funding comes from. And we wanted to just kind of start it at this 35%.
Right.
Acknowledging that we try to make it as high as we can with our proposed fee structure.
No, it's okay. So I appreciate that. Because one of the things I was thinking about was this drinking water program. For example, Napa County is a local primacy agency, right? So it's a complicated regulation, it's pretty technical, and they're doing the permitting and all the oversight associated with drinking water. And in that program, we don't pay, or the regulated community doesn't pay any state board fees. It only pays a permit fee to Napa County. So I'm just wondering why this would be different than that.
So as we move through implementation, there is a significant regional board workload in this order that might be a little different than the program you referred to, in working with the local agency on defining the roles of oversight, but the enrollment is still done through the state, maybe with in-kind help from the local agency, but this initial couple years or 3 years is going to be very regional board heavy in the workload and the NOA review. But we acknowledge that the local agency may be helping with that, but it's not going to be 100%. And then after that, I think that the regions are looking at implementation agreements with those local agencies, for example, Napa. And I don't know if Melissa wants to chime in on any of the details, but then this could change. But we are being careful up front because we know of the significant workload on the state and regional boards in the first few years.
Yes, I'll jump in on what Laurel just said. So as we indicated before, there is a lot of moving targets right now, and we kind of have to see or reassess down the road if it's warranted to have a higher reduction for the oversight. That's fine, because that is a reflection of reduced staff workload. So as Laurel said, this is a starting point. If the community comes in and feels that there's a better number to start with, but we're still going to try and collect that $2.5 million from new enrollments. So it's rebalancing. The way I say it is, if the minimum fee is $750 and a number of facilities get a reduction, the minimum fee may become $800. Again, I'm just making up numbers there as an example. So we try to balance everything out. But again, we will make the commitment to kind of monitor this. In the first couple of years, as Lowell said, it's going to be hard because there's going to be a heavy workload, especially the regions, to get the enrollments in. But once things kind of settle out, balance out, whatever term you guys use, we can reassess it. And if we need to change it, we have the ability to make the changes on a yearly basis.
Okay. Yeah, and so the question I had emailed in was about that $200,000 per person per year. Is that $200,000, does that include what you were talking about before, a third indirect and a third of the foundation programs?
Yes.
Is that what goes into that 200?
Yeah, so the fully loaded fee is going to be higher than what most people would consider for a staffing person, because you have that extra third for the foundational programs. We're actually more in the 220 to 225 range. But again, we're starting at $200,000 as we kind of see what happens with this program. But yes, that's a fully loaded rate.
Okay, but so you're saying that you're using 200,000 now, even though it's actually 225. So things may go up if you go to the 225, but they may come down if you do the sustainability programs in the local office.
Yeah, we'll have to see ultimately, how many staff are being designated out in the regions to work on all this. Again, the estimate right now is 14 with 2. That's how we get the 16, but 14 in the regional water boards. It could come out to maybe it's 12 in the long term. It could come out that it's more like 18 in the long term. I see Laurel kind of nodding her head there. So again, these are estimates, and that's the hard to set the fees until we see what the final accounting is, if you want to use that term. That's going to take a few years. Laurel, do you want to add something?
Yeah. The reality is that $200,000, it includes staff labor and the burden labor, but it also has an estimate of the foundational cost and an estimate of indirect, because
so I'm going to get off into the weeds here. So when we actually look at costing, it's the higher, let's just say 225 right now. When the water board does what's called a budget change proposal with the Department of Finance, they're currently using $200,000 when they do a budget change proposal for the WDPF. So our actual cost for the water board is higher than what finance uses when they add new staffing in. So it's a tough one to really talk about. Is we always end up with higher costs than what we're initially budgeted with. But yes, they're roughly 600 staffing in the WDPF. Every year we can kind of see, okay, what was our final expenditure number? Divide that by the number of staff in that program. That gives you the average costing.
So yeah, so just so you know, this makes me a little bit nervous because it sounds like you're going low right now, even though you know that you're going to be way off budget. So chances are 2 years from now, the fees are going to have to go up substantially to account for that difference.
And whatever we set our fees, yes. You know, if we set them too high, people complain that too high. If we set them too low, we go later on and say we need to raise our fees, and people complain you're raising my fees.
Right.
So no matter which way we go, we're trying to hit that middle spot. It is really difficult. Laurel?
Sure. And we're trying to budget out for
Yes, yeah.
2-5 years. So yeah.
That's why we're going to look at it yearly basis. You know, it might take a couple of years before we start the yearly review. But yeah, we're kind of throwing the dart at the dartboard and hoping it hits the bullseye, and we know it's not.
Right. All right. Yeah, thank you for that.
And we're going to continue to evaluate how many staff, you know, are dedicated to this, of existing staff. I wanted to also mention that this PY estimate, the personal year estimate, includes percentages of senior staff time as well as executive. So it pays into the waste discharge requirement program, because to run a winery order statewide, it's not just staff work, it goes all the way up. So part of the foundational program is also percentages of other people's time. And I think that that's why the 16 number is somewhat of a sticker shock to industry, because I know that I've heard the comments of, I know there's not 16 staff working on wineries, and that's correct, but it's going to take 16 PYs with the seniors to work on this over the next 5 years.
Okay,
and so I wanted to acknowledge.
Yeah, so what you're saying, it's not like 16 full-time people, it's
Right.
like 10 full-time people and then a little bit of this person over here and over here to get
Yeah.
to that. So
Like
it's really, it's the estimated budget divided by people, or, yeah.
Yeah, like for right now, it's almost 100% of my PY.
Sure. Right. And 10% of,
My
John.
boss,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yes.
and it's a hard thing to capture here. So just know it, because it does take some of that, and it's part of the cost. They're doing this instead of other work, which is important work.
Yeah.
This is definitely a priority of ours.
Yeah, so
Okay.
another way of looking at it, the 16 estimated PYs, you could have 30 different people charging to it, but expenditure wise, we can only add up to 16 total staff. Okay, before we get to,
Thank you.
so Suzanne, do we have anything else before we move to the next commenter?
Not at this time, but I reserve the right.
Yeah, no, we can always come back. You can always put your hand back up. This is we're much more laid back than the board meeting, so we have no problems if people raise their hand multiple times. Noel, before we go with you, I just want to let people know I got a message that after Noel, Michelle, Benvenuto can't raise her hand. So Michelle, if you're listening, we'll have you go right after Noel. So Noel, you're up.
Thank you. This, I think I'm slightly more confused after the discussion with Suzanne over the PYs. I think originally, what it sounded to me that I was hearing was there's going to be a significant workload up front, and these fees are set and the proposed reductions are set based on that initial workload. And so my brain was then going the next step of, well, if the fees are covering the cost of an initial workload that then is expected to decline after everyone is enrolled, that then moving forward, there's the potential that the fees would go down. However, after the conversation with Suzanne, I feel like that's pretty unlikely if a full load staff person is actually 225 and it's only being covered at 200. So maybe we could talk about that and then I have some other questions.
Yes, so you're correct on both of those. If the eventual workload, we see that it takes fewer staff than the 14 regional board staff and the 2 state board staff we have on the screen. If it takes less going forward, we will come back and go to our board and say, you know what, for the regulated community, we have enough, dischargers paying in, we can reduce our fee. But we always have to be aware of the fact that if the staff effort going forward is more, or the costing is more than what we had anticipated, they could go up. So that's the balancing act we're trying to do, is not have sticker shock up, 4 years from now.
And it also depends on how many wineries enroll. We have some estimates, as you're aware, Noel, but if we have a significant amount of work and we only have 5 wineries enroll, there's that variable as well.
Right.
But I guess the work, but then the work would be less. And so I just want you to know that we are not trying to increase the revenue through this winery order to the state. We're trying to estimate the work it's going to take to implement the order as adopted by the board over the next 5 years. In the stormwater program, fees have gone up, but fees have also come down or stayed the same over many years. They fluctuate depending on the cost of the program. And I can say that that is true to this order as well.
Okay, thanks. And then Laurel, I have a question for you on the threat and complexity concept. When I look through that, it doesn't seem like tier 4 would have anything but, let me refresh my memory.
I'm going to ask Sarah if you can go to the threat and complexity page of the.
Anything but a category A, just because of the requirements for groundwater monitoring. And I know we're going back and forth on whether or not there are off ramps for the ponds. But can you walk through kind of a fictional winery that might fit in other than category A because of the groundwater monitoring requirements of the order?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm going to turn my head. I'm not doing emails. I'm looking at the fee handout. So forgive me. So we have the possibility for tier 4 is a 1A, a 1B, or a 1C. And a 1C, let me go to that, would be where there's a pond and land application area, regardless of the groundwater monitoring. It could be the area wide. If you look at the tier 4 complexity A, it's the on-site groundwater monitoring. We're looking at the off-site area wide type groundwater monitoring as an alternative to the cost of the on-site. So that would fit more into the category C.
Okay, that's
so
what good.
Oh no, and this is also, fitting the winery order into a threat and complexity rating is one of the options. And there's where we're looking for feedback on, does our criteria make sense, where we put subsurface, where we put the land application area and ponds. So we welcome feedback on that analysis.
Okay. That's what I was unclear on, as to whether or not, so you're saying if you fit into the off ramp of the regional groundwater monitoring for land application, and you didn't have a pond, that then you would be under category C.
It's if you have the pond and the land application area, it's the pond and the land application areas. It seemed to align with this category C of land application. And we're assuming that the land application areas with no ponds have some type of subsurface, which is a different.
Right. No, so I guess my question though is, we're not finding wineries that would not be subject to groundwater monitoring for their ponds. So when I read category C, that means they can't be under C because they have groundwater monitoring for their pond, which puts them in A.
I see. Yeah, I think that's something that we should look at, because I was looking at it more on the land application process. But you're right, that is something we should consider on how to work through that.
Okay.
But as Laurel mentioned, this is the first time we've looked at a threat and complexity. So we have no, I can say issues and no problems getting the feedback. This is what Laurel, she needs the feedback. As an admin person, I can't help Laurel figure out what's what on a threat and complexity model, but it will allow program staff to say, do we need to make a tweak here, a tweak there? This is why we weren't sure if we needed a second meeting in April. If we need to, we can come back and discuss anything. If we're just going to talk minor little things here or there, that's different. But if we're going to look at changing something or we have to validate something, that's what Laurel needs for her staff to kind of figure out how to do I'm going to use the word complex, but this is definitely a much more intensive way of doing a fee. Volume is easy, but it may not capture site-specific stuff. Laurel?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I wanted to make sure it was clear that we're not doing either or. It's either a volume-based fee or this threat and complexity when we go to adoption. So it's not that there's going to be a pick and choose. And Glenn probably made that clear, but I'm going to reiterate it. We're either going with a threat and complexity or a volume-based fee. So one thing to think about from industry or stakeholder is which one do you prefer? And then if you have a preferred one, what are the tweaks?
So Noelle, did either one of us able to answer your question there, or do you need more?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's hard. I came into this meeting with a preference, but Laurel, based on your feedback, if there's going to be changes to the threat and complexity proposal, because when we reviewed with our members, when we reviewed the different options and we looked at the threat and complexity, it didn't look like there really was a potential for much difference in the tier 4 based on threat and complexity, because we don't see anyone having the pond off ramp for groundwater monitoring, and therefore everyone would be in the complexity category A, was what we looked like. So if there's going to be adjustments to that, then that might change our thinking on versus the volume and threat and complexity. I do want to express appreciation for the separation of sizes. There is, and you've heard us say this a lot of times, that there's difference between those on the bottom end of the tier and a top end of the tier. So we do appreciate that split and having different fee levels for those at the bottom and the top.
That's great. Thank you for that feedback. And I'd be interested in feedback on how to address the on-site groundwater monitoring for ponds when they have the area-wide groundwater monitoring for land application. If we don't get significant feedback or comments on that, it'll be harder for us to figure out the best solution forward. So if you do have any thoughts from your group, that would be helpful moving forward.
Yeah, certainly. And I also wanted to, I mean, the local agency program and the sustainability, those fee reductions are also important to us, and we appreciate you thinking through those and how to provide incentives for participation in those.
Thank you, Noelle. So before I have Michelle.
Glenn, can I say one thing? This is Melissa from the regional board. Okay, sorry, just to hop in there real quick. I just wanted to also express that we are really interested in feedback on the local agency reduction percentage. And I'm pretty sure, I believe that Kim Withrow from Napa County is in this workshop. So I just kind of wanted to also express that, to reiterate that we are currently assessing that percentage as well. And any feedback on that would be helpful too. So thank you.
Well, I'll put it out there that we do think, I mean, given the work that's done by Napa County, that only a 35% reduction would be disappointing. We think that those wineries should get a higher reduction because so much of that work is taken on by the county.
Great, thank you for saying that.
Okay, and before we jump to, Noelle, did we cover you? Okay. So before we jump to Michelle, I think I forgot to state that when we do get to the point where we go to the state board for a fee adoption, May, June, whatever it's going to be, We have a number of different ways of doing that. You know, if we come with a united proposal that says, hey, the regulated community, the technical staff at the water boards, both feel that this one option is the way to go. Obviously, that makes it easier for the board members. But we can propose different options to the board. So I'm just saying if half the regulated community prefers a volume and half prefer a threat and complexity, we can take both to the board and supply, you know, rationalization for both of those and have the board decide what they feel is the best method. Knowing that, again, that 3 to 4 year frame, we can always change it. If we've come down the road and realize, you know what, this is not the best model, we need to have a different model, we can do that. Probably 4 or 5 years ago in the oil and gas community, we changed the fee structure 3 straight years until we finally found a landing spot that, well, they were never happy with the fee, but at least it made more sense to the regulated community. So whatever we do this year is subject, if need be, to change later on. Okay, so I know you can't raise your hand, but Michelle, I'm trying to get your name here. Benvenuto, if you're on, we'll take you next. There she is, okay.
Hi, can you put the projected program expenditures slide back up, please? So I did want to talk about the local agency 35% fee reduction, especially here in Napa, because we do have a local program now that has been very effective. And if you look at our water quality data, the data shows that the water quality is good and stable and actually getting better over the years. So we do have data to support that our programs are currently working. And when I look at the staff workload, I guess I'm wondering, one, if the initial review, why that can't be done at the local level. Because you're saying there's so much work that has to be done up front, but I'm looking at the staff workload saying, God, Napa County basically would be doing most of that. So that's one of the questions. And then you'd said, so if Napa County gets a reduction in fees, you have to maintain that 2.5 million. But why would you have to maintain the 2.5 million if the staff workload is going down? Like, wouldn't that 2.5 go down?
Okay, so before Laurel or Melissa jump in, so yes, that 2.5 is if we need to remain the 16 PYs going forward after the local area oversight adjustment. But if it turns out that if Region 2 and the Napa takes away, I'm making up numbers here, 2 PYs get taken out of the pool, now we only have to target 14 PYs. So that number is going to go down to $2.1 million. So there can be an adjustment later on. Until we see what the actual ending workload is, that's where we're struggling to make sure we do that. That 35%, I'll probably have Melissa jump in on here. Again, I think Laurel mentioned it. It was just a starting point. If it makes sense to be a higher number, I don't have any issue making it higher. But yes, theoretically, you would assume the statewide number of PY would probably be reduced. And our target revenue would be reduced accordingly as well. It's just not reflected right here. So Laurel or Melissa, any comments on what Michelle had?
I was going to see if Melissa wanted to chime in first.
Oh, go ahead first, Laurel.
I was just going to acknowledge, Michelle, you're correct. If the local agency takes on like the annual report reviews and follow-ups, the inspections for pre-permit and compliance, those would not be things in the local or the regional board would be doing. So the PY count should go down for that local area or that regional board. And so acknowledge and agree. What we're trying to figure out right now between now and when fees are actually adopted is what would the local agency roles be for the next couple years while we do enrollment. If there, and maybe Melissa, Michelle, and I, and we can talk about that or comments on that, because that could change the fee.
Yeah,
Great.
so this is Melissa with Region 2. Just to kind of piggyback on what Laurel just expressed, is that we actually have a meeting with Napa County staff this week to kind of kick off this implementation-ish style plan that will outline more clearly the roles and responsibilities of the local agency. And we just had an implementation plan meeting with the regional boards and the state board last week. So it happens that this is right in the middle of also flushing that out. That would definitely, I think, play back into this percentage.
That's great. And I look forward to hearing, or let us know how you need support to answer those questions.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's Napa County has been such a great partner, and they've built a trust and collaboration with the wine industry. So I think, in order for regulation to be effective, you need people to be enrolled, and for Napa County have built that trust with wineries. I think that's how we're going to get greater participation. And so the more we can do to encourage that local program, and it's not, wineries are not going to want to pay 2 fees. So if the water board, we have to, file a notice of intent, I would think that would be a nominal fee, not a 35% reduction. So that's it for me. Thanks so much for calling on me.
Thanks, Michelle.
Could I add one thing to that?
Yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Melissa.
I just wanted to thank you, Michelle, for expressing that. And honestly, being from the San Francisco Bay Regional Office, I do work collaboratively with Napa County and recognize the valuable input that they have done over many years. So we see that as well. Hence, this conversation is even happening. So thank you for expressing that.
Thank you.
Okay, next with their hand up is Kim Withrow.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say thanks. I appreciate this dialogue with the fee reduction for the local agency, because we are hoping to be the local agency, and I guess 35 is a starting point, and we're hoping maybe it would be higher than that based on the workload. And we look forward to working with the regional board on ironing out what that workload will actually look like, and hopefully getting a larger percent reduction for our local wineries. So, but everything so far I think I've heard is at least favorable for that. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Next hand up, I just see, looks like first note, is it J Kips or JK Ips, depending on how you get signed in. So I'm not sure who that is with their hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, this is Joanne Kipps.
Okay.
I'm a retired employee of the Region 5 in the Fresno office. It's been about 10 years or so since I retired. And so, but I've been keeping an eye on winery issues. So I'm familiar with the wineries in Region 5. And I have a question. The language that is in the complexity and threat to water quality, it's right out of section 2200, correct? Basically, the existing fee schedule for WDR people who have WDRs, right?
It's very close, Joanne. We tweaked it a little bit for this order.
Because I wonder if the intent is to be comparable in the language, and is particularly to threat to water quality, because I don't know, maybe if things have changed in 10 years, but when I was a staff in the program, we would reserve threat to water quality 1 for the most, well, we would really make it truly to those that would cause a long-term or permanent change in the receiving water's designated beneficial uses. And for the most part, most of the wineries would be 2 or 3 in terms of threat to water quality. I would urge you to consider maybe not using threat to water quality 1 language for the wineries that would be under this general order, because on the whole, they're smaller than the ones that would ordinarily be regulated through individual orders. So that would be one recommendation. Okay. And if I have time to offer one more on this issue of complexity, I can lost count of the number of times when I would urge my managers, my supervisors, to identify as threat to complexity A for a discharger that had multiple groundwater monitoring wells. And I would always be voted down, and we would always be said, no, 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 that doesn't qualify as an A. And so I think there may be some consistency issues if you say just because a discharger has groundwater monitoring wells means it should be pegged into this complexity A hole. And oh, sorry, sorry. Oh my goodness. I would urge you to go away from this threat to water quality complexity and just go with the volume. So much simpler, so much simpler. And that might give dischargers an incentive to implement water conservation measures. And that's my 2 cents for now, except I may have something to say about caseload, because the way I pencil it out, it looks like you have maybe 300 wineries per staff. And let me tell you, that's way too much. The staff cannot handle that much of a workload. If anything, you're talking maybe 25% of what the staff is really required to implement this program, because it's all groundwater based, and that's complicated. It's complicated. And so I'm sorry for occupying the time, but I may issue some more comments later. So that's me, that's my comments.
All right, thanks, Joanne.
Thank you so much. I wanted to answer one little question or feedback on your first part about the threat. So when we looked at wineries currently paying fees, there is a short list and the fees are pretty high. And so what we were showing was that in that higher side of the wineries, there are some 1As, but I understand what you're saying about, is that appropriate for up to 15 million gallons of processed water per year? That's something that we welcome feedback on, is that should wineries be 1A? It's a valid question that we can reconsider.
Thank you, Laurel. So just as a quick numbers count, since Joanne mentioned number of facilities on average per PY. So I believe, and Laurel can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to round the number off. There's estimated about 1,500 facilities that would become enrolled under the general order, plus a handful of individuals that will remain. So I'll just say about 1,500 is the target number. If there's 14 regional board staff, you're looking at what, 110 or so facilities per staff member is kind of the average. It always fluctuates. Some regions is going to be higher per PY and some are going to be lower. Laura, are you going to add something there? No, okay. So Noelle, your hand is still up. I don't know if that's because you had another question or if that's just a lingering.
So I was just going to lower my hand, like, let me make sure I've lowered my hand. However, I did have a thought on that. I don't know that it's accurate just to divide the number of facilities by the number of PYs, just because wineries are not evenly distributed.
Yes, I agree.
Statewide.
Yep. Yeah, that's just for those that look at the averages. An average is just a number. It doesn't mean it's accurate.
And in the calculation of the PYs, we put 0 PYs in some of the regions where there are really no wineries. If I don't ever want to say none, but they pretty much identified that there's no wineries. And so this would be, you still can't, I agree with Noelle, you can't say it's the 1,500 divided by the 14, but this 14 is from the regions with wineries.
Okay, I won't get into mean mode and mean, medium, and mode. I forget those 3 different terms of statistics. It's just a number to kind of put it in a ballpark. Okay, so I'm looking to see, Sarah, any other email questions come through? It's a good chance to check that.
No, not right now.
Okay, Joanne, your hand's back up. Go ahead.
Well, how do you explain why the general order, if I'm correct, had identified over 4,000 wineries that could be subject to regulation under the general order? And then you're saying 1,500 facilities are targeted. Are you like assuming that it's going to be like a 15-year rollout, basically, that you get 1,500 this, in the next 5. How do you figure the discrepancy between the two numbers?
So I believe, Joanne, I think, and there's so many numbers related to the estimates of wineries that need to enroll, but I think the 3,000 to 4,000 is the number of bonded wineries in California. And of those bonded wineries, we believe that about 2,000, 1,500 need to enroll. And then there's 500 or so to 600 wineries that are currently in an individual order or regional board waiver or general order that will be reallocated potentially to the statewide order. So the 1,500 is like the new or other bucket that is to be determined. A lot of them are enrolled in the local agency oversight in Napa. And so it's not that there's 1,500 without any regulatory oversight, but they don't have water board oversight potentially.
Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah,
You're
I think,
welcome.
Laura, a number of those are actually too small, so they're below the threshold to actually enroll into the general order.
Yeah, and others, they may be a winery and they're processing and so forth, but all their winery wastewater goes to a publicly owned treatment work or a sanitary connection, so they don't have land application. So that's another set that they all do tank and haul, and so this order would not apply. And then there's a percentage that we're learning is maybe a little bigger than we thought, but they also do distillery operations, and that would not apply in this order.
Okay, so we'll give it a moment to see if anyone else has any questions. So as a kind of a summary, as we're waiting to see if any hands come up, if we get any emails, we're talking about 2 different fee methodologies. There is nothing that's stopping someone else from submitting a third type of structure to look at, but right now we're looking at a volume-based. The pros on that one is it's fairly simple. The cons is it may not capture site-specific requirements that could increase or decrease associated staff time for that facility. And then obviously a more complex threat and complexity structure. I believe Laurel is going to talk with some staff on maybe the language of how to define the threat and complexity can be tweaked or changed a little bit. We've talked about the local area oversight. Generally, those, especially in the Napa area, feel the percentage should be higher than 35%. I think hopefully everyone now understands that whatever we're targeting today, anticipate that there's going to be changes once hopefully everyone becomes enrolled. But once we get to a stable place, we'll be able to reassess the impacts of the oversight, the impacts of sustainability, the impacts of actual enrollments or non-enrollments, and then the focus number of staff going forward. So there's a lot of pieces that could potentially change our analysis on what the fee should be a few years down the road. So anybody else have any questions? Just give it a moment here.
No email questions.
Okay. So as I'm waiting here, the biggest question I think we're going to have is, do we need to have another meeting in a month? Separate from that is, how long do we give individuals time to give us feedback? My viewpoints, I had 2 different things I was looking at. If we were going to have another meeting, say in about a month from now, we would look to have comments within 2 weeks, so by the end of this month. If it was determined, you know what, we're just going to make some small things, we'll probably give people a month to give us comments, and then we can kind of tie things up and do a quick review before we go to the board. So that's my take on it. I have not actually talked with any staff yet on either one of those. So again, I was looking at another meeting in April. Let's get our comments in by the end of March. If another meeting is not needed, we'll extend the comment period out for about a month, so say mid-April. And then that'll give us time to put our documents together to the board. And again, as I mentioned earlier, when we go to the board, we can actually propose multiple options or multiple methodologies, and let the comments to our board help our board members determine which one they feel is the appropriate one to move forward with. So I'm going to put Laurel or Melissa on the spot here, since I have not had a chance to talk with either one of you on where do we want to go from today.
It sounds like there's some potential adjustments to the threat and complexity if we go that route. I think that in general, the volume options are streamlined. They're a little easier to work through than the threat and complexity, but we wanted to provide that difference. So I think that if comments can be, I don't know if 2 weeks is feasible for industry, but 2 to 3 weeks, and then come back in April to show the updates might be helpful before we go in front of the board, since we might make some changes.
Melissa, your comments?
Whatever Laurel said. No, I'll say that sounds great. I mean, I think I was going to say if anybody on this call from the stakeholder group all wanted to weigh in on that process, but that sounds like Laurel struck a pretty good balance of both having a follow-up meeting and creating time for the comments. I think that kind of makes it feel a little more supported on hearing the word of our stakeholders.
Okay, since we're comments right now have been internal to the water board, it sounds like program would prefer to have a second meeting in April. I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't have a preference one way or the other. It sounds like 2 weeks may be a little short. So maybe I propose 3 weeks for comments. Give us a couple of weeks to go over that, get our paperwork together. So maybe the 3rd week in April, we'd have to see what's available on schedules. Sarah, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here. Do you have any issues about doing a 3-week comment and then trying to set up a meeting in 3rd or 4th week of April?
No, I think that's fine. So first, please send your comments to feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov, and I'll display it on the next slide. Oh, I can just do that right now. Send it to us at the fee branch and we'll share it with water quality and whatever other staff we need to. And just be aware that the turnaround time from that 3-week response to when we schedule the meeting, it really depends on staff and room, everything availability. So just be aware that, you know, we'll give you guys the 3 weeks to submit comments to us, and just keep your eye out for a meeting scheduled sometime before the end of April.
Okay.
We can't necessarily pick and choose our dates.
Okay, so 3 weeks is Monday, April 5th. So I'm not sure if industry says, hey, you know what, Friday the 2nd is the same as Monday the 5th, or does that weekend make a difference to those that they'll make comments? Again, I don't have a preference here. So let's just say comments have to be back by Monday, April 5th. That's 3 weeks from today. And then we'll look either the week of the 19th or the week of the 26th of April. If anyone in the regulated community, if something's going on, because I'm not dialed into there, if there's some type of convention or something that says you cannot do certain days, let us know and we'll stay clear of those days that may be a conflict for those of you out in the community. So Laurel, Melissa, with the dates that I say, any issues on the program side?
Opening calendar. Just a moment. We have a couple of the winery order staff outreach webinars on April 21st and 23rd. And then before that, there's a Region 1 board meeting that's on the winery order. So my recommendation is the week of the 26th.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So with that update from Laurel, we will request that comments be submitted to us by Monday, April 5th. And then we'll look at availability for a follow-up meeting the last week of April, which is the week of April 26th. Most likely, we will then go to the board in June, would be our tentative time frame to take an item to the board. Again, we don't have to rush this. If there's a determination and there's agreement that we need to take an additional time, we can do that as well. David, I see you popped in. Did you have any comments right now?
No, I would just say I do appreciate. I think brings some value to have a second stakeholder meeting, especially kind of listening in and kind of listening to some of the concerns. It'll give us an opportunity for program staff to go back, do some research. And I would just recommend to the stakeholders, again, please provide their comments. And if there's any like additional clarifications they'd like for us or something else we'd like to kind of present at our next stakeholder meeting, please submit those comments also. I would just also like to add that on the fee side, prior to our meeting or anytime you'd like to speak with Glen or I individually, if you'd like additional questions answered or something like that on the fees or the budgeting process, please don't hesitate to reach out to Glen or I.
Okay, so yeah, I'm just looking. So I'll have staff look at a date last week of April for a follow-up meeting. Again, the presentation that we have that will get posted on our fees site for anyone who needs a copy of that. We will request comments in by Monday, April 5th, 3 weeks from today. And then roughly three and a half weeks after that, we'll have our second meeting. And then again, tentatively, depending on how things go, we'll look potentially, and I say potentially because it could change, to take an item to our state board in June for adoption. If it needs to slip to July, there's no issue with slipping it to July. Program staff is going to look at threat and complexity language or any changes there. We'll do our best to assess the local area oversight, understanding that these are just targets. Actuality varies significantly from estimates. So once we start getting a better idea of the actuals that come in a few years from now, we'll be in a better position to make sure that we dial it in appropriately. We always have the ability on a yearly basis to make changes. So whatever our board does adopt this summertime, we can always on a yearly basis change that if something significant is identified that was not part of our analysis right now.
Glenn, I just wanted to say something because we received a comment about not being able to comment on any proposed changes until after they're seen, for the April meeting. So I just wanted to, obviously you can't comment on something you haven't seen, but, we do try to send the agenda out, with all the changes 1 week prior to the meeting. So be on the lookout for that. And also, like Glenn mentioned before, we're right now in the stakeholder process. It's a lot less formal than the board process. So, you don't have to wait until the stakeholder meeting to send us comments. Once you see the handout, feel free to start a dialogue with us. Feel free to comment at the stakeholder meeting. There will be a formal comment period once we take the fees to the board and it gets put on the board meeting agenda. So just be aware of that. But until it gets to that point, it still is a fairly informal process. So if you have input, even if you haven't seen the changes or you want to see a change that you have a suggestion, please go ahead and email those to us. It doesn't have to be necessarily on something you've seen today or hope to see. Send us whatever suggestions you have or comments.
Thank you, Sarah. I tend to forget that most of you are familiar with going to the regional board or the state board on a formal comment period. We're not at that stage. This is very informal. So you can give us your feedback at any time. We'll do our best to incorporate what we can. It's when we go to the board, maybe right now in June, that's the formal comment period that you guys are familiar with. So thank you, Sarah, for that clarification. Still waiting to see if we get any final hands up. And I'm assuming, Sarah, nothing else is coming in on email.
No other questions.
Okay, so with that, David, you want to sign us off here on any final things before we move forward with, again, our commitment dates of having a meeting in the last week of April, comments due by April 5th. Go ahead, David.
I just want to thank everyone for participating today. You definitely make this process a lot easier for us and allows us to help make decisions that we do take forward to our board. So definitely appreciate everyone's feedback. Appreciate program staff being involved today. Want to thank the fee staff behind the scenes on managing the Zoom and the webcast. So thank you. And again, just look out for the next upcoming meeting, which will be, as Glenn mentioned, end of April. Again, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.